Here's a little bit of good news for you. Ron Paul, he's continuing to make headlines, and I think it's great news because he's actually doing stuff for freedom, unlike his son. Nationaljournal.com is the
take
site
a jab whenever you can get it.
where this is being reported on by Rebecca Nelson. Secessionists across the world were inspired by Scotland's energetic attempt at independence from the United Kingdom earlier this month, and Ron Paul, as it turns out, joined them. In an essay on his eponymous institution's website Sunday, the former U.S. congressman from Texas wrote that any supporters of freedom should cheer secessionism because it allows for a smaller government, a constant mantra for the libertarian and perennial presidential candidate who didn't previously realize there were more than a handful of secessionist groups in the United States. He says, I was real pleased with that and a bit surprised, Paul told National Journal, but then on second thought, you think, why not? Why not more? That is, as in, why not more secessionist groups? Fringe groups, says the article, calling for states and regions to secede from the U.S., such as the Second Vermont Republic and the Alaskan Independence Party, gained more publicity in the weeks leading up to the Scottish referendum. As the outsized federal government continues to encroach on individual rights, said Paul, he thinks there will be a groundswell of these movements. He said, quote, it's something that I think is going to grow because the failure of the federal government is going to get much worse. Now, that is not a tough prediction to make, right? Like, it's pretty obvious that the federal government's not going to turn around. They're not going to get smaller. Even if Rand Paul gets elected, the government's not going to get smaller. They're going to keep getting bigger and more intrusive and more oppressive. It's a safe bet to say that the government's going to keep getting bigger.
Seems like a safe bet.
I got to tell you, Ron Paul is like the coolest guy.
Isn't he?
He's really cool is. Guy. He's so cool. I remember
have you met him?
I haven't gotten to. I did meet Rand. I have a picture with Rand. But the thing is that when I found out about Ron Paul and started listening to him, like my first instinct was I really wish he were my grandfather. So I got to hang out with him and learn cool stuff from him. And oh my God, not that I actually really like my grandparents, but they're awesome. They're super objectivist and they're awesome. I just really love Ron Paul.
He's adorable. I mean, what's not to love?
He's so adorable.
Right. What is not to love about Ron Paul? We continue here with his statement. He says, when the bankruptcy evolves, maybe some of these pension funds are confiscated and the wars never end and bankruptcy comes forth, people will say, hey, we're getting a bad deal from this. Why don't we leave? And he added, quote, I think it's inevitable people wanting to leave will be there and the numbers will grow, unquote. Realistically, though, Paul said he doesn't think any of these groups could actually succeed. Despite the founders' own deep belief in secession, they gained America's independence from Europe, after all. He said the Civil War set the precedent that secession would carry very, very bad results.
Well, I think if you see states, regions seceding around the world, that you might have a better chance of seeing it here in the United States.
What do they mean you can't succeed? There were 14 succeed at seceding. There were 14 countries that seceded from Soviet Russia peacefully.
Well, and let's not forget the United States seceded from Great Britain.
If you can secede from the Soviet Union peacefully, anybody can do it. Sorry.
It is
in Soviet Russia, Union secedes from you.
It is unfortunate that Ron Paul isn't as gung-ho as might like him to be. And it's a common objection that, if a state secedes, then there's going to be violence. The federal government will roll in tanks or they'll drop a nuke or something like that. And it sounds like Ron Paul is playing into that fear, and that's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate because I'm telling you, if you can get away from Soviet Russia, worst communist regime ever, you can get away from the U.S.
The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE, and there's reasons why I think it would work now that it didn't work in the 1800s, namely that we've got information that travels instantly, and so any kind of invasion or something crazy like that, people are going to know, and they're going to know when it happens. Secession, back on the table for discussion, one of my favorite topics, and Ron Paul's on board. He's saying we need to have more secessionist movements in the United States. He likes that we already have some, Vermont and Texas and New Hampshire and Alaska. These are all places with existing secession movements. They should be bigger. So, of course, the more you talk about these things, the more realistic they become. And so that's one of the points of bringing it up here on the radio wave. So you'll have an excuse to, go wherever it is you're going. Maybe you're driving somewhere, driving to work, or going home, sitting down for some dinner or late night snack. Why not just ask your friends or family members or coworkers, hey, what do you think about that whole Scottish secession thing? And just throw it out there and see what people think about it.
I would use the word independence if I were
true.
you. Secession's kind of a dirty word.
Unfortunately, in the United States, it certainly seems to be that way.
But if you're using the secession word in regards to another country, I don't think it matters. Like if you're in the United States and you say the word secession,
that's a good point.
You're a bigot. If you're talking about Scotland seceding from England, then I think you're sort of you're safe from that label.
Wait a minute. Hold on. If a black person used the term secession within the United States, would they be a bigot?
I don't think they would necessarily be a bigot. They'd just be confused.
We'll continue with some of the comments from Ron Paul about secession. He has come out and gone on the record to say that he thinks there needs to be more secession movements in the United States. Unfortunately, he tempered his statements by saying that he doesn't really believe they'll be successful in the U.S. because, the whole Civil War thing kind of settled that deal. And I'm sad to see Ron Paul, make a statement like that. But it's not an uncommon perspective from people to believe that it'll happen. It happened before. It'll happen again. The feds will roll in tanks if you try to secede. And really, shouldn't that be an indicator? Like, if you think that about secession, if you think that if a state secedes in the United States or from the United States, that then the feds are going to roll in tanks, shouldn't that be an indicator as to yet another reason why you should secede? Because these people are so crazy and so dangerous that they would roll in tanks to try to crush a peaceful movement? Because that's what I recommend is peaceful secession. Try not to fire on any government facilities,
Unless they fire on you first. But
I don't know. I still don't think that violence is the solution.
I think that if you're being shot at, you have to either shoot back or hope that you can hide well enough.
You have the right to do
or
so,
die.
but it may not
that's
be
an option
prudent.
Too. But here's the thing. If you take the amount of violence that has been committed by the federal government over, its entire existence, and then you compare it to what the violence would be if we seceded, even if you just maximize the potential of it, like really, really amp it up, it's still less. So I'm going to go with secession.
Paul actually
Logic.
comes out here and he speaks to National Journal in their article, which we'll link to you on our Facebook, Google+, and Twitter here in a little bit. But he says, quote, "By our history, the heavy hand of the federal government would come down. They'd probably shoot him." So he's just coming right out and saying he thinks that they would get that violent.
I love
don't
him.
think they would. I don't think they would because it would be a huge PR catastrophe for the federal government. I mean, we already know that people don't trust them and that they don't like them. Congress has terrible approval ratings and things like that. But if they start to actually slaughter in mass the people of one state, that's going to look really, really bad for them.
I'm not looking to get shot whether it's in mass or not,
So what does that mean?
I'd prefer the federal government not shoot me.
What do you think they would do?
I have no idea. When it comes to secession, I consider secession to be a philosophical issue, not a practical issue. I don't think you're anywhere near it in the United States. I mean,
one out of four people in the United States support their state seceding.
Yeah, well,
that's I would say getting near it.
25% ain't nothing. Do you think that?
What do you mean that's nothing?
Do you think that 51% of people should be able to decide in a given state should be able to decide that state secedes?
Absolutely.
I don't.
Yep.
I can see both viewpoints here, though.
I think it should be like 66%. I mean, if it takes
just another arbitrary number.
It is just another arbitrary number. I think you should be able to secede yourself. But if we're talking about the practical applications of a state, if you're going to have, this idea of voting, I think that it should be a larger number to get things done.
Well, you're probably going to have sorry, Lauren, you're probably going to have that happen in New Hampshire because you probably have to pass some sort of constitutional amendment.
You would have to pass
which you would need to
constitutional
have like what 2/3 or something
like that.
I mean, we're
3/4.
talking about peaceful secession, so the only way to peacefully secede would be a vote. So, I mean, the thing is that if you're going to do that, then you need a philosophical renaissance first because you need to get the majority of the state on board. So even if we're not going to have a nationwide philosophical renaissance. We need one here in New Hampshire.
Absolutely.
And actually, I think it'll work a lot better. I've been talking to just regular Joe Schmo on the street, and I'll tell you what.
About secession?
About anything, like libertarian-wise. And I'll tell you what, here in New Hampshire, freedom is alive, even with people that are quote-unquote liberal. I'm like, you're not a liberal, you're a libertarian. It's so funny talking to these people here in New Hampshire that are like, I'm a liberal. And I'm like, what do you think of, businesses being free? Oh, I'm all for that. You're not a liberal. You're a libertarian.
Well, the classic definition of liberal is libertarian, right? Like
right, and I explain that to them. I'm like, you're classically liberal, sure. And they're like, oh. Interesting. And they're like open to it.
So a little bit more here from Ron Paul from nationaljournal.com. In typical fashion, Paul argued the principle of secession was more important than what could actually happen in reality. It's the threat, he said, that's important to keep the federal government in check. Quote, I think what's most important is we have a concrete right to secede. Even if we never had any secession or any state declare independence, we would be so much better off because there would always be this threat. Once the threat of a state leaving was removed, it was just open-door policy for the federal government to expand itself and run roughshod out over the states because the states couldn't do much. Unquote. And I do support the idea of nullification, and that's sort of what he's getting at there is having state governments say no to the federal government, not fully secede, but to simply say, oh, you want to tell us to do this thing? Like national ID is a good example of that. There was many years ago this national ID card that was proposed by the feds, and many state governments said, no, we're not going to participate in that. Now, unfortunately, the reasons they did it had nothing to do with freedom. The reason the state governments didn't want to participate was because the feds weren't giving them money to implement the national ID card. That's why they didn't want to do it.
I'm surprised they didn't threaten to remove funding like they did with the speed limits. Or wait, the drinking age. I'm sorry. So you remember how the drinking age came about? Yeah. So, I mean, most people were most states were at 18, and some were even younger than that. And the federal government stepped in and said, if you don't bring it up to 21, we're going to pull your state funding. So I'm surprised they didn't pull the same thing in this case.
Yep. Well, that's what we need.
That's surprising.
Well, that's something that we need to see happen, whether it's in New Hampshire or somewhere else, is state governments to turn to the federal government and say, no, you know what? We've decided we're going to lower the drinking age and you can have your $1 million or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever the arbitrary amount is that they're still bribing the states with for that. We'd rather have more freedom than your $2 million. Thanks, but no thanks. Goodbye.
Thanks, but no tanks.
Yeah. So there you go. That's the latest from Ron Paul. He's out there pushing the secessionist idea, and I appreciate it. Even though he may not be in the belief that it's possible, he's at the very least putting the idea out there. And I'm sorry, Mark, I think 1 out of 4 people in the United States is a damn good starting point for secession.
I think
but it's not enough for a vote.
No, it's not enough for a vote. But again, it's just we're starting a conversation. And for 1 in 4 people to already feel strongly enough that, yes, I support my state leaving the union now. Let's do this. That's great. And remember, that poll that showed the 1 out of 4 was a recent poll, so it was pretty fresh. And there were only like 53% that opposed it. So you had 25% saying, yeah, let's do this. 53% saying, nope, stay together. And then the rest of the people were undecided. So you got close to another quarter who really don't know. I mean, those people are on the fence. They could move towards secession.
Right. I mean, I don't disagree with you, Ian, but here's where I'm coming from. I've been pushing philosophical renaissance for a long time, way before I moved to New Hampshire. And this is really the first time that I've even considered secession was after I moved here.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't think it was possible because I think our country needed a philosophical renaissance because, a lot of people are going to die as soon as you take out all those federal, programs.
That's right. They'll be choking on magnets.
Well, they won't have. they won't know how to take care of themselves because they've been coddled so long.
Oh,
but I
you
think
mean like Social Security or something?
Yeah, but with a philosophical renaissance, they'll understand how to take care of themselves before we take away the programs. And and that's the thing is that here in New Hampshire, this is the first place I've actually felt like these people are grown up enough to be able to handle their own independence.
The Granite Staters are definitely an independent lot.
They are. They're awesome.
If New Hampshire decides to secede in some kind of libertarian vote, and I mean, we're talking about a fantasy world today, anybody who needs government programs that doesn't feel like they're going to get them in the new libertarian New Hampshire can move right across the border.
Vermont.
It's only 30 miles no matter where you are or something like that.
Vermont or Massachusetts.
I disagree with you for the first time, Mark.
Why is that?
I don't think it's a fantasy world. I think it's totally possible.
Well, it's not. Anything's possible,
There you go.
but it's not today.
Toll free. Of course it's not today. It's going to take probably at least a decade. 855 450 free. We need to get more people to move here to make it more possible. So join the Free State Project at freestateproject.org. We'll come back with more. Your thoughts are welcome. It's Free Talk Live.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.